I get it. You're scrolling through endless workstation listings, wondering if the next big purchase will finally let you render a 3D model without a hiccup, or if it'll just sit there gathering dust while you keep using that old laptop that chokes on every new software update. You're probably thinking about the cost, the space on your desk, and whether the machine will actually live up to the hype before you hand over your credit card. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through the HP Z2 SFF G9 and see if it's the kind of just right fit or if you're better off looking elsewhere. First off, the Z2 SFF is a small form factor workstation, which means it's trying to cram pro-grade power into a footprint that's roughly the size of a typical home office tower. That's a big deal if you have a cramped desk or you're planning to mount it under a table. The chassis is about 16 inches tall, 7 inches wide, and 13 inches deep, so it won't dominate the room, but you'll need to make sure you have a decent airflow path because the compact design can get warm under sustained loads. The heart of this machine is an Intel Core i5-14500, a 14-core, 20-thread processor that sits in the 13th generation Raptor Lake family. It's not the top-tier i9, but for most engineering, CAD, and design workflows it's more than capable. I've seen teams of architects run Revit and SketchUp on similar setups, and they're able to keep the UI responsive while the software crunches geometry in the background. If your day-to-day revolves around large assemblies in SolidWorks or multi-sheet Excel dashboards with a dash of Python scripting, you'll likely feel comfortable with this CPU. The real kicker is the 16 GB of DDR5 RAM that comes stock. DDR5 is still relatively new, but it gives you higher bandwidth than DDR4, which translates into smoother handling of large datasets. For someone who routinely works with 10+ GB simulation files, that extra bandwidth can shave a few seconds off load times. Now, storage is a 512 GB NVMe SSD. It's fast enough to boot Windows 11 Pro in under 10 seconds and load applications almost instantly. In practice, you'll notice that opening a 2 GB Photoshop project is a breeze, and rendering previews in Fusion 360 pop up without the usual waiting game. However, the 512 GB capacity can become a constraint pretty quickly if you store a lot of raw video footage or keep multiple project archives on the same drive. The good news is the SFF chassis includes an additional 2.5-inch bay, so you can slide in a larger SATA SSD or a traditional HDD for bulk storage without opening the whole system. Connectivity is where the Z2 SFF shows off a bit of professional thoughtfulness. On the back you have 2 USB-C ports with Thunderbolt 4 support, 3 USB-A 3.2 ports, a DisplayPort 1.4, HDMI 2.1, and a Gigabit Ethernet jack. That means you can daisy-chain a high-resolution monitor, connect a fast external SSD, and still have room for a USB-C dock or a dedicated graphics tablet. The inclusion of both DisplayPort and HDMI is handy if you need to run a dual-monitor setup for trading screens or multi-window design work. One thing to keep in mind, the machine does not ship with a dedicated GPU. HP markets this as a professional workstation, but it's really a CPU-only box out of the gate. If you need CUDA acceleration for rendering or deep learning workloads, you'll have to budget for a separate graphics card, and that can be a tight fit in the SFF case. The motherboard does have a single PCX 16 slot, but you'll need a low-profile GPU to stay within the height limits. Who should buy this? If you're a freelance engineer, a small to medium design studio, or a business that needs a reliable Windows 11 Pro machine for daily productivity, this workstation hits a sweet spot. The Pro edition of Windows adds BitLocker encryption and group policy management, which is useful if your IT department wants to enforce security without the hassle of a full-blown domain server. For students in mechanical engineering or digital art programs, the price point is also more approachable than a high-end tower, while still offering the ability to upgrade RAM to 32 GB or add a GPU later. In short, anyone who values a tidy desk, needs a solid CPU for multitasking, and can live with a modest graphics solution will find this a good match. On the flip side, if you're a video editor who relies heavily on GPU-accelerated effects in Premiere Pro, or a 3D artist whose scenes regularly push the limits of VRAM, you'll feel the absence of a pre-installed graphics card right away. Adding a GPU later is possible, but you'll be wrestling with size constraints, and the cost of a low-profile GPU can be disproportionately high for the performance you'll squeeze out of it. Likewise, power users who demand 64 GB of RAM from the start will need to open the case and replace the existing modules, which isn't a deal-breaker but does add a bit of DIY to the purchase. Finally, if you're looking for a machine that can sit